San Diego's beautiful Balboa Park has a lush landscape filled with exotic plants. It's the region's beloved jewel with its colorful gardens and broad lawns, leafy promenades, and hidden canyons. Yet few of the plants in these gardens are native. When the city fathers set this parkland aside, it looked a lot like this: 1,400 acres of chaparral-covered mesa, some native trees in the canyons, a little wildflower bloom in spring, and that's about all. The park remained unplanted for 40 years, until 1909, when city boosters came up with a plan. They would throw a huge party, an exposition to honor the completion of the Panama Canal and San Diego's place as a growing city on the Pacific. In just 5 short years, they took the natural landscape, renamed it Balboa Park, and transformed it into a fantasy land with a fantasy landscape that awakened San Diego to its horticultural potential. On the 100th anniversary of the Panama, California Exposition, we'll explore the role that agriculture and gardens and horticulture had on that enormous event. We'll discover the many hands that helped shape the landscape and how their choices continue to influence the way San Diego grows. Today on A Growing Passion. The ambiance of the 1915 Panama, California Exposition was created by the Spanish colonial revival architecture, combined with the extensive lush gardens that surrounded these buildings. The gardens featured plants from around the world, many of which were new to San Diego: Canary Island palms, Moreton Bay figs, jasmine, and others. More than 200 varieties were planted for the exposition. This amazing array of plants showcased San Diego as a grower's paradise and promoted horticulture, agriculture, and floriculture as exciting regional industries. This dome botanical building anchored the exposition gardens. The 2 large reflecting pools were designed to enhance the building's architecture. Because of the lush landscape, the exposition was nicknamed the Garden Fair. Fairgoers were captivated. The botanical building offered fairgoers a mesmerizing display of exotic plants. This open-air conservatory made a statement about San Diego's importance as a city and how conducive its climate is for growing. I talked with Vaughn Marie May, a historian who specializes in California landscapes, about how important the gardens were to the exposition. Tell me what was happening around the turn of the century that made plants and horticulture so popular.
At the end of the Victorian era, there was still avid interest in global plant study and collection. And this was a display, this was the showcase, this was how you, some people collected art, some people collected plants. The more exotic, the better. So conservatories were popping up everywhere, and San Francisco had a glass conservatory, we had an open air.
Tell me who inspired this beautiful structure.
His name was Alfred Robinson. He was a very active plantsman in California. He had a beautiful nursery, Rosecroft Gardens in Point Loma, and it was his idea to have a grand lath house to put on a botanical display like none other. He was able to pull that off with the help of all the exposition planners.
So it sounds like that kind of put us on the map. I mean, we were now
Absolutely.
A big city.
Absolutely, it did. And it was interesting because at the same time, Los Angeles had immense horticultural interest. But San Diego got the opportunity to experience and demonstrate the potential for horticulture in Southern California.
It's 1915, you and I are sitting here enjoying the plants. It feels a little like a sauna, doesn't it?
There was a hothouse off the back here. It's gone now. It was taken away in the 20s. Went out 100 feet by 50 feet. It was glass, and it held a hothouse collection of tropicals. And that was kind of the nod toward Panamanian botany. So you could actually see what would be in the tropics. But it would be much different because you'd have natural air here, but you'd go into maybe 20 degrees and dripping wet, and it would be a hothouse experience. Very sensory.
The hothouse also heated the reflecting ponds and the tropical plants growing there. The reflecting ponds were inspired by the Moorish gardens of Spain. Their quiet waters reflected the surrounding architecture and the sky. Walkways served as main pedestrian arteries. The botanical building and its surroundings were an ensemble, framed by the exquisite facades of the nearby buildings. Even today, it's a lovely sight. Directly behind these beautiful buildings was a different kind of growing display.
And you went back behind the botanical building and saw vast model orchards and model citrus groves, and the Lipton Tea Pavilion was there. All these Camellia sinensis, Asian camellias for tea. Lipton, who was staying at the Hotel Del, planted all these to show people they could have tea every day. And it was promoting that small farm idea. And then if you look through time, San Diego has built on that.
What happened here influenced more than just what happened at the exposition, right? It affected all of San Diego.
It did. This was a pivotal moment. This began botanical, agriculture, floriculture, horticulture, commerce. This building was the axis mundi, the central area on showcase. This was the potential that San Diego could deliver. And from then on, coupled with the architectural style, this changed the identity of San Diego. This marked a significant change in San Diego's future.
The plant palette that was so exotic 100 years ago seems pretty familiar to us today, while the botanical building continues to charm. We have the exposition designers to thank for that, but who were those people and how did they create these gardens? The decision to go ahead with the exposition was made in 1911. That gave Faire organizers 4 years to transform a chaparral-covered mesa into a world-class exposition. The task of planning and landscaping the exposition grounds fell on the shoulders of Frank Allen. Allen was an architect who worked under Bertram Goodhue's direction, designing the layout of the exposition grounds. He proposed the iconic bridge over Cabrillo Canyon and the community of buildings that we now call the Prado. But Allen knew little about plants. Allen began to study plants. He talked to botanists and horticulturists about how to grow plants and about soils and about pest control. What he learned and accomplished in a few short years was absolutely remarkable.
Frank Allen believed that the landscaping was just as important as the buildings for a successful exposition. He knew nothing about plants, and yet he said, I will shoulder the responsibility.
The exposition began growing its plants. There were 35 acres of propagation beds and 100 acres of growing beds. More than 1 million plants were being propagated at a time. Several million had been grown by 1914, making Balboa Park's nursery the largest in California. The plants were grown under the direction of Paul Teen. Teen would eventually become one of California's best-known landscape architects. But from 1912 through 1915, he was in charge of growing and planting the millions of plants for the exposition gardens. This ledger is a record of all the plants grown in Balboa Park Nursery between 1912 and 1923. Some of those plants were grown from seed. Some were grown from cuttings. Some were even grown in home gardens dug up and donated to the park. These fast-growing plants define the landscape here at Balboa Park and the gardens of San Diego. Preparing for planting was itself a monumental achievement. The soil on the mesa was hard and seared by the sun. It was so compact that dynamite was used to blast hundreds of holes just to put plants in the ground. When the park opened in 1915, the dusty mesa in the desert had been transformed into a magical place, with many styles of gardens, different themes, and different experiences for visitors strolling through the exposition. Huge pots with enormous century plants anchored either end of Cabrillo Bridge. Fairgoers leaned over the parapet to see a pool below, filled with water lilies and bamboo, pampas grass and papyrus, all of which provided habitat for thousands of birds and frogs. Cypress and palms contributed varying shades of green, and eucalyptus, from blue gum to red mahogany to sugar gum, were planted everywhere. Formal European gardens were in style then, with their carefully pruned and controlled plants. The Prado was lined on both sides with clipped black acacia trees. The botanical building was screened with 15-foot-tall eucalyptus trees that were just a few years old. The grounds were covered with semi-tropical foliage, much of it chosen because it was fast-growing. There was a Japanese garden. Montezuma Garden, in the shadow of the California Tower, was a Spanish-influenced strolling garden, a tranquil and sheltered spot. There were fuchsia and canna, lantana and pittosporum, geraniums and salvia, begonias and bougainvillea, plants from every warm climate, growing and thriving in San Diego's sunny and mild climate. The Garden Faire, as it came to be known, was a huge success, and that landscape from 100 years ago, it continues to influence the park's landscape today.
Well, the main plant I think that you'll see around the park is a eucalyptus. In pictures of the exposition, you'll see dragon trees that look more like dracaenas. You know, they'll have a thick trunk and they'll be spiky, have a spiky top. Well, those plants are 100 years later now, and they're very big. Ficus australis is a Moreton Bay fig. Well, that Moreton Bay fig is still there in the park today. It was, as far as I can tell, it was originally planted in a flower bed and was unusual even as a small plant. It was a tremendous undertaking to think that they had 4 years to take a scrub mesa and turn it into the beautiful landscape that they turned it into was a real wonder. And it was done by people who most people in San Diego aren't familiar with.
One name that we have not yet mentioned is Kate Sessions. Sessions was a renowned plantswoman. She owned a nursery here, and she was a florist. Sessions is often referred to as the mother of Balboa Park, so most people assume she planted the Exposition gardens. That's not true. Sessions was really involved in the establishment of the park and the early plantings, but she had very little role in the Exposition.
Well, Kate was certainly very interested in the Exposition and interested in the horticultural improvement to the park that might result. But she personally did not have anything to do with landscaping plans or landscaping for the Exposition. She sold plants to the Exposition nursery, and those plants obviously were used in the park, but that was really her only role.
Sessions was an expert in the horticulture in and around San Diego. She saw the huge potential of the vast tract of land that was then called City Park. To kickstart the park's development, Sessions cut a deal with the city. In exchange for space to operate her nursery, she would plant 100 trees a year in the park and provide 300 more for the city. Her nursery became a demonstration garden for what would grow in San Diego. This was her nursery here, right?
Something over 30 acres right in this area.
Some of the trees in the northwest corner of Balboa Park, like the cork oak, the coral trees, and the eucalyptus, trace their roots back to Sessions' nursery. Beautiful. The coral tree. Is this one of her introductions?
She popularized these trees. I don't know which varieties she may have introduced. There are so many different ones, but she loved this tree because it brought a splash of color in dry and dusty San Diego.
You know, today, eucalyptus are have a mixed reputation. What do you think Kate would think if she were here?
I think Kate was an experimenter through and through. I think if Kate learned that a tree was not right for our climate or environment, she'd be the first to say, let it go.
So the issues with these, brittle branches, shallow-rooted, they fall over in big windstorms and rainstorms.
One of the things that you have to keep in mind is that when Kate was planting these eucalyptus, they weren't right next to houses, there weren't cars parked everywhere. She was putting them in the park with the idea that they would be a green, low-water, high-visibility tree.
And I guess it takes a long time till you figure those things out.
One doesn't often know if a tree is going to be a good tree for the location for years, decades.
Sessions called San Diego a city of gardens and devoted her life to adding beauty to the parks of San Diego and Coronado. Her roles in the Exposition may have been minor, but her impact on San Diego was anything but.
Well, we have to thank her for introducing probably 90% of the plants that we would look at. And I should say introducing or popularizing. In some instances, she wasn't the first person to bring a plant to San Diego, but she was the one who helped people understand how to grow it in their gardens and popularized it. Some of the plants that Kate Sessions popularized here would be the bird of paradise, many different kinds of palm trees, many different kinds of aloes and cactus. Then she was an early advocate for growing those here in San Diego. In 1915, they wrote about this unusual red bougainvillea they saw blooming on the Exposition grounds, and that was definitely one of Kate's popularizations. And ceanothus is one of the things she brought out of the canyons and turned into a garden plant. In 1939, Kate Sessions was honored with the most important horticultural honor that one could receive. It was the Frank N. Meyer Memorial Medal, and this was given by the American Genetic Association for people who had distinguished themselves in the field of plant introduction. And she was the first woman to receive this award, and another woman was not honored with a Meyer Medal until 1972.
Kate Sessions was an adventurous, independent woman well ahead of her time. She tested the limits of plants, of climate and soils, and forever changed the landscape of Balboa Park and San Diego. Of the millions of plants grown for the 1915 Panama, California Exposition, surprisingly few remain. There are a couple, like this big Indian Laurel Bay fig, but most of the plants were lost when the park became a naval training base for World War I. The gardens we know today, like Alcazar Garden, actually date back to a second exposition, the California Pacific International Exposition, which was held in 1935 and 1936. The evolution of Balboa Park's gardens is a fascinating perspective on San Diego history, its people, their interest, and the changing trends in landscapes. Kim Duclos is a ranger and an expert in the history of Balboa Park. I know these gardens are a little more modern, but what about this?
Yes, this beautiful Indian laurel fig tree is the last vestige of the first garden that was here that was called Montezuma Gardens. And it is absolutely enormous in its size, and it's the only thing left over from that first planting. It was probably in a 24-inch box and maybe 6 feet tall when it was put in the ground.
So this tree's more than 100 years old?
More than 100 years old.
God, can you imagine what those people must have thought? Grow, 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 and here we have this massive tree. If only they could see it. The Spanish influence of the original gardens and buildings were hugely enhanced in the 1930s by architect Richard Requa.
Richard Requa, really formalized this garden, and so he patterned it after castle gardens in Seville, Spain. So that's why it has this really formal look with the boxwood hedges, and then you have these beautiful Moorish-inspired fountains and things like that. So.
This tile is my favorite.
Oh, I know. It's beautiful.
What about that big guy right there?
I know that's one of the iconic trees in the entire park, a Canary Island date palm. Prior to the exposition, people grew plants in their own yards that they later provided for the exposition. And that was one of the plants grown in somebody's yard, dug up as a mature tree, brought here and put in the ground. So it's well over 100 years old. Yeah, if you ever wanted an indication that San Diego is the perfect place to grow plants, you just have to look at the palms. I mean, we have Mediterranean fan palms right here. We've got bamboo palms from Central America. We have triangle palms from Madagascar. King palms off in the distance. Over here we have Guadalupe Island palms off the coast of Baja California. Mexican fan palms. Another beautiful palm, this is the Bismarck Noble palm, also from Madagascar. Then you have these lovely humidity-loving palms called Florida Everglades palms growing in the end of our lily pond. You have a Cuban royal palm here that almost looks like it's been made with concrete. It's amazing. So there are probably at least 300 kinds of palm trees growing within the 1,200 acres of Balboa Park.
300?
300.
Wow.
We're going to go over to this remarkable tree, maybe one of the most remarkable trees in all of Balboa Park. This is an Agathis australis, a New Zealand kauri tree. We estimate it's between 80 and 100 years old, probably planted for the 1935 Exposition. It has this wonderful corkscrew-like growth habit, so it twists as it goes up, and then it has this wonderful mottled peeling bark, sort of like a sycamore tree. But it can live to be 2,500 years old and ultimately be one of the largest trees growing. It rivals giant sequoias. That's how big this may ultimately be.
Wow.
2 millennia from now if it's still growing here.
It's huge now.
Yeah, it's huge now, and it's only going to get bigger, and it's a beautiful specimen of this type of tree.
Well, that's a big tree.
Yeah, so here we are in Palm Canyon, and yet 2 of the most magnificent specimens of the Moreton Bay fig tree are to be found at this end of the park.
Palm Canyon feels like a tropical oasis, tucked between the park's buildings and accessed by an elevated wood bridge.
We've got some of the oldest trees in the entire park in these Mexican fan palms that were planted way back probably in 1908. And then over time, we've just added to that. We have probably 120 different species of palm trees now, and well over 2,500 plants altogether growing here in Palm Canyon.
One of the newest gardens is the Japanese Friendship Garden. These gardens were carefully laid out and are groomed daily. They harken back to the formal gardens of 1915. Layers of plantings and winding paths create an exotic landscape of beauty and serenity. Here, the park's busy Prado seems a world away. This is a formal garden. Most of the gardens we have are not formal gardens, but this is.
Yes, this is meticulously kept. You can see the hand of man throughout, and everything is very formally pruned, and it's just quite lovely.
The buildings stay the same. They don't change, but the gardens are living and they evolve, right?
Yes, and I try to explain to people, this isn't colonial Williamsburg. We aren't just stuck in time. This is an experimental lab for plants. It's constantly evolving. We try things out. When things work, that's great. We have some of the historic plant palette, but we're constantly adding new things to it as well.
Zorro Garden, with its sunken stone grotto, was designed as a nudist exhibit for the 1935 Exposition. It's now a butterfly garden with colorful perennials and majestic trees overhead. The Desert Garden is 2.5 acres of mature succulents, cacti, and other desert plants from around the world. This garden was planted in 1976 and features ancient tree aloes and famous dragon trees. Every generation brings something new to the park's landscape. Ours is no exception. What comes next? My guess? It's gardens like this one in front of the Balboa Park Club. This stunning garden is filled with plants of amazing shapes and sizes. It's part of a movement towards gardens that are beautiful, but require little, if any, water. This is really important in San Diego, in fact, in all of California's dry Mediterranean climate. The gardens of Balboa Park continue to evolve. They're living history and proof that the Exposition's planners were right. Balboa Park is a garden fair. Balboa Park gardens are constantly changing. They've been planted and replanted with new plants and with familiar plants for the last 100 years. This is a natural process because plants, like people, are mortal, and no garden ever stands still. I'd love to be a visitor on opening day in 1915, stroll this Prado and see the lush gardens. The buildings, the architecture, they're pretty much the same, but the gardens have evolved like all living things evolve. What will they be in another 100 years? Wouldn't it be fun to know? I'm Nan Sterman. Thanks for watching.